Good afternoon. I'm Peg Frashon, Director of Programs at Cure in Montevideo, and I'd like to welcome you today to the fifth installment of our six-part series, Sharing Stories, Growing Relationships with the Land. And today we have Carrie Redden, and Carrie is joining us from Chokio, from 12 Tells Farm. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this project. So the Sharing Stories series grew out of a partnership that was produced as part of the We Are Water West Central Minnesota project this past year. And our shared goal with the series has been to amplify stories of those people who are using conservation practices and that have important regenerative qualities while reducing the impacts of climate change. These practices generally improve soil health and water quality. They grow deep connections with the land and those who came before them. These stories are from practitioners, people with their boots on the ground and dirt underneath their fingernails. Together, these storytellers are from a varied backgrounds, cultures, and generations. We're at a critical moment where we need to hear perspectives from path builders who are catalyzing change for themselves and for their communities. Um, with each of this series, we start out with a little introductory video that was filmed by one of our partners and collaborators, Brian DeVore from Land Stewardship Project. Last year, this time, he went out and met with all of the different participants, and he shot video footage of them out on the landscape in their natural environment so that when we did this series, you'd get a chance to really see them in their element. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to start with this video.
I'm Carrie Redden. I farm with my husband, Derek. We're in Stevens County in west central Minnesota near Chokio, and our farm is named 12 Tails Family Farm. We are a certified organic dairy farm, and we milk 35 cows and raise our replacements. We also raise a little bit of beef, chickens, and eggs on our farm. We're a pasture-based dairy, so the cows are out grazing about 7 months out of the year, and then we also outwinter the cows. Yeah. So Derek and I are beginning farmers for sure. We got into farming as a hobby, as just when we became more interested in where our food was coming from and wanted to have a little more control over how it was produced. When we really made the jump from hobby to more of a job, I suppose, was after we got involved in Land Stewardship Project's Farm Beginnings course, and then followed up with the Journey Person mentorship course. So despite the fact that Derek and I are very much first generation farmers, we farm on a farm that has been in his family for, he's the fourth generation, so over 100 years. The farming skipped a generation in the 80s when my husband's mom and her sisters moved off the farm, and Grandma and Grandpa rented out the farm to the neighbors for 30 years. And so the farm was going to go away when Grandma was ready to move to town because no one else in the family wanted anything or didn't want to be on the farm, and we didn't want to see that happen. So we're here trying to make a go at it. So we're a pasture-based operation, and we rotationally graze our cows. We do pretty intense rotational grazing in that we move the cows every 24 hours, and we try to extend the grazing season as long as we can, up to 7 months out of the year here in Minnesota. The biggest benefit we see to that is to managing soil health on the farm. So we like to keep a permanent vegetative cover on the land as much as possible. to use perennial crops where we can, and then to use the animals to harvest the crop, as well as distribute the fertilizer, manure inputs. We're really looking at increasing the organic matter in the soil so that the soil is going to be able to retain water better.
That's a brief little introduction to Carrie and Derek's farm, and I'd like to welcome Carrie to join us. So Carrie, in the introductory video, you said that neither you nor Derek grew up on a farm. So can you tell us a little bit about what made you decide that you wanted to make farm life your passion?
Yeah, definitely. Now, if you ask Derek, he will tell you that he always knew he wanted to be a farmer, that it was just in his blood. But I think that was, based on visits to the farm, the family farm, like when he was a kid and things like that. He always loved, like being around animals, being outside, working in nature, and fixing, fabricating, repairing things, stuff like that. However, he was very much discouraged from like pursuing farming as a career. But so when he was a kid, the farm was kind of going away. His grandparents were retiring. As far as like being a working farm. And he just took the opportunity to always like work on farms wherever he could, as soon as he could start getting a job, like at age 12 and up. And so he worked on a lot of different farms, seed farm, hog farm, dairy farm. He had done a lot of different things. I, however, like grew up in town and never considered farming as something that I would do. That being said, Derek and I met in high school and started dating then. And so we've been together since then. And this whole farm journey we've gone on together. So when we got married, Derek got a job in in conventional hog production, just because he was always just excited to like be able to work in agriculture in any form that he could, because he really didn't think it was something you could just start doing on your own. And I was always just kind of undecided about what I wanted to do. He really encouraged, us to kind of like start a little bit of a hobby farm. We started thinking a lot more about where our food was coming from and how it was produced, and just what we could do ourselves. And then when we became parents, it was like that just all got magnified so much, like, having little kids and stuff, and really wanting to, just be more involved in our own food production for sure. It wasn't until I had heard about the Land Stewardship Project's Farm Beginnings program it wasn't until then that I thought that farming was something that we could pursue on our own, because we were always told, like, you have to be born onto a farm. You have to be pretty big at farming to be able to make a go at it. And it's really hard to make money in farming, but we all of a sudden were exposed to this network of people that they didn't grow up on farms, and they weren't humongous farms, and they were doing things a little bit differently. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, like, I think this is something we can do. and all of a sudden, like, I was decided about something. Like, I knew that I wanted to be a farmer. It took a lot of work to figure out how that was going to work. But that's really where it started. So like I said, we did the Farm Beginnings program. We started researching, we started planning, we started visiting, just really dreaming about like what we could do as farmers. We had a small herd of Black Angus cows that we raised for beef. And again, like, still just kind of a hobby. Derek had previously talked with his family about coming back to the family land. And yeah, he really was time and again discouraged from it. His grandma would say, "There's no money in farming. You're not big enough. I don't want this for you." I don't know if we were stubborn, persistent, whatever, but we kept, like going to conferences and visiting farms and doing things. And until we really had a plan for what we thought a way to, make a living farming. And we presented it to Derek's grandma. And so she finally was kind of like, okay, like, I guess you can try. And so we ended up out here when at age 8, so it wasn't until she was 86 years old in 2013, she needed to move off the farm, that she was finally like, okay, because, we didn't know what was going to happen to it otherwise. And so in a way, like, we had done a lot of planning off farm, but in a way also we were kind of thrust into it. And so, yeah, we've been here since 2013, and it was in 2015 that we had really committed to this plan of organic dairy and started that road.
When we were talking earlier in the week, you shared with me how the organic dairy dream became a reality. I think you mentioned you hosted a field day on your farm. You want to talk a little bit about that and share that part of your journey?
Yeah. And so I think that was in 2013. Maybe somewhere in there, but maybe 15. We had hosted, a transition workshop on our farm. It was basically kind of just like a troubleshooting transition field day about like the challenges of transitioning land from conventional to organic production. And I don't know, we were able to do some really good networking at that field day. We ended up making a really good connection with Brad Hines, who is the lead dairy scientist at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, which is part of the University of Minnesota over in Morris. And we were able to connect then. So they have conventional and organic dairy herds, and it's a pasture-based system research farm, and they sell their organic milk to Organic Valley. And it was at that point then that we were able to connect with Organic Valley, sign a contract with them, start a transition plan with them to eventually get on their milk truck.
So getting on the milk truck route also has presented some challenges over the years. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was in 2015 when we signed our contract with them, and they came to us because there was a high demand for the organic milk, and they wanted us, and it was very exciting. And so the transition process to being certified organic is 3 years. So it wouldn't be until 3 years later in 2018 that we would be able to organically market our milk. And by that time, there was too much organic milk, and that shouldn't be a huge issue. I mean, it was discouraging in that we didn't have our organic market right at startup. But for an organic farm, there's nothing about the milk that's any different that it shouldn't be able to be sold into the conventional market. And so we were told, like, it'd be no big deal. You sell your milk conventionally until we are able to take it on the organic truck. And we then at the time were told that our farm was too small for a truck to stop. So yeah, we are very close to big dairy farms, big conventional dairy farms. We're just 2 miles off of a route where multiple trucks go by in a day. But yeah, we were told too small of a farm to stop. So we had to dump milk until we were able to get onto the organic truck, which is just like really crushing. I mean, I knew that's the nature of industry, but it was really crushing to know that that's not an option for any startup farm.
So really the thing that saved you not only was your perseverance, but the fact that you both in addition to trying to get started as an organic farm, you both had to have off-farm employment to get you
Oh,
through this time, right? And so sometimes I think people idolize or they romanticize becoming farmers and think that they don't, they're not going to have to work other jobs, but that really isn't the case for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story there?
that was very much me. I was going to these farm meetings and saying like, okay, I'm going to be a farmer. So when can I quit my job? Like, where is the plan? How many years do we do this? And we've had a plan for that has adjusted and changed as we've started. Unfortunately, like we absolutely would not be able to do this without off-farm income for us during our startup here. There's no way. And so that's a challenge, but it's also like very necessary and responsible. I feel like that we have kept our off-farm employment during this time.
So one of the things that you're still doing, right? You're not working off farm any longer, correct? But your husband,
I work part.
Oh, you do. That's right. You said you did work part-time. So being able to still, have that size farm that's manageable and regenerative and responsible, right? And still being able to do what you love, but then also being able to support your family has been a compromise and a lot of energy to do that. When you think about this way of life, farming and working the land, what are some of the things that you feel have been the benefit for your family besides being able to produce your own food? Like, what has it meant to have your kids growing up on the family farm? And I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let you. I don't want to steal your lines. I don't want to give away your secret.
Well, I don't know if it's a secret, but so for the kids, like they're 8 and 9 now, and they don't know anything different because we started doing this when they were pretty little. Other than the milking cow stuff. So we've been milking cows for 3 years. And I think we do a lot of talking about like that there are sacrifices we make to like do the things that we do on the farm, but that it's really important to us, like that it's really important to us to take care of the land, take care of the animals, to raise a healthy food product. And we try to make the work on the farm a little bit fun. So it's not always such a drag, but they realize that what we are doing on a day-to-day basis is very different than their friends at school. And we talk about that.
It is for sure, right? So, some of our previous participants have actually homeschooled. I can't remember, do you homeschool as well or?
Don't homeschool. So another thing too, though, I should say like about like keeping families on farms and keeping small farms going. I also like very much want to see like rural communities thriving, and not that like there's anything wrong with homeschooling or anything like that, but it's really important to me to have our kids enrolled in local school. We have a very small school that's still open. Their classes have 6 and 7 kids in them respectively. And I want to see that school thriving as well. That's why I want families to stay around and things like that too. However, like our schedule on the farm, like can be a little bit tricky with like buses, things like that, getting everybody off to things and activities. We were very fortunate to be able to keep the kids home for a full year of distance learning at home. So it's a balance.
It is. Wait till they become teenagers. Because mine are 13, 15, and 16. And, we don't have a operation such as yours. Ours is more of a hobby farm, but we have animals and we have cattle and hogs and chickens. And we do sell our chickens at the local grocery store, but not our chickens, our eggs. But, there's always that running home to do chores before the evening game, or, or you're doing chores at 11 o'clock at night in the dark, or, whatever it might be. It does sometimes present a juggling event, but I think one of the benefits, like even in our situation, is when our kids come home, they go outside, and like my youngest daughter really loves the prairie, and she goes out and sits in our pasture, and she finds new flowers, and she braids grass, and she gets dirt on her hands. She loves the dandelions are blooming right now. Actually, last weekend, she spent the entire weekend picking prairie violets and dandelions so that she could make jelly. We started making those because she loves them so much, so that's her thing. She went and picked a whole ice cream bucket full of prairie violets and dandelions. And so we try to find things about being on the farm that can be their own thing. And that's kind of her own thing, is that she helps do that. And my oldest daughter likes to help make during the canning process. Like, she loves to cut the stuff up for salsa, and that's her kind of thing. My son still hasn't found his thing, but I'm sure he will at some point. He likes to cut the grass, and we don't cut a lot of our grass. We just cut a little bit that's around our house, but he kind of earns money doing that and thinks that's pretty cool. So his dad's funny. My son likes to play sports, and his dad grew up on a farm, and his dad said that, my son's always like, "Dad, I got to go to the weight room." And my husband's always like, "You see that bale of hay? That's going to be about 30 pounds, maybe 40. Why don't you lift that?" So I think that there are super benefits of kids growing up out in nature and going outside, listening to the birds, and, having that ability just to be in their own element and not worry. Like, as a parent, I don't have to worry about them getting hit by a car. They can ride their bike and, all that kind of stuff. I like that. And I think the benefits of being able to feed your kids good whole food is also really important. So I would agree that that's super important. I'm thinking that one of the things that some of the participants that have been in the series, they've had to cultivate their own market, and they actually sell from the farm, and some don't. You made the decision at this point not to sell from the farm. Can you talk a little bit about what that journey was like, or what the things you had to consider to make that decision for you?
Yeah. I think, trying to direct marketing seemed like a really great way for us to start, because it has like pretty good revenue generating potential. But also, like, it's a lot of work, and like that, I don't think that was where our strong suits were necessarily, like in marketing and things like that. Whereas we really like the direct care of the animals, like harvesting, planting, things like that. And so for us to be able to kind of like, outsource the marketing part of things for us right now, it makes sense for how we should direct like our time and things like that. Direct marketing became especially hard when we were talking about like meat products and things like that, because of like processing facilities. Like, we were raising 300 chickens a year, and we were doing all of our own processing and everything. And when we wanted to try to outsource that, there is nowhere to do it. So that's discouraging. And like, even with marketing beef and things like that, it's challenging. Like, we still drive over 60 miles for processing. And then now it's a huge challenge, of course, to like get in for processing appointments since COVID and things like that. And to just find like a processor that you really like loves, because that's a really integral part of like your marketing chain and things like that. Like, it's tricky. And like, our products are certified organic on the farm, but I like, for us to do direct marketing and find a certified organic processor, just too much.
Sure, that is a real common theme that many of the folks participating in the series have talked about is the lack of butchering operations. And then even finding a butcher that understands what grass-fed beef is and organic is, and can articulate that to whomever they need to, or even work with your customers, right?
Yeah.
You know, we've been blessed, but COVID definitely has made it much more difficult to find people who can get you in. Like,
Mhm.
we usually set our fall dates like after the first of the year, and when I called in early February, they were already booking into 2022.
Right.
and and so that's like, that is really tough. I would agree. You know, we kind of moved past this question, but one of the things that I did want you to talk about a little bit is, you know, initially when we talked about this, you started your husband's grandmother was renting the land
Mhm.
to conventional farmers. So what did it look like for you to transition the property? Like, was it row crop to pasture? And how did you go about figuring out how to establish pasture, what you wanted to plant for pasture, that whole
Mhm.
process? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I'd love to. So yeah, it was conventionally row cropped corn and soybean rotation, for like 30 years. And so coming into it, we had a lot of help. We did a lot of planning before we kind of jumped jumped right into it. So like I mentioned before, like we did farm beginnings. We went from farm beginnings to Land Stewardship Project's journey person course, where we got paired up with mentors, for specific farm ventures. And also that was also like a big financial planning part of it too. But anyway, we went to field days, we went to workshops, we went to conferences, and we did a lot of networking. We made a really good connection with Kent Solberg, who is the grazing specialist for the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota. And so kind of like working with him, then we end up talking about the NRCS office and like tools that the NRCS has to offer us. And so then we connect with our local Stevens County NRCS office. Corey Walker at Stevens County helped us to start like a grazing plan for exactly what we wanted to, and wanted to set up for rotationally grazing. And from then we found out like that there's a regional grazing specialist. So that's Jeff Duchesne out of Perham. And he ended up putting together a huge, really intense grazing plan for us. And when I say really intense, I mean like he had like advice for everything from like seeding varieties, and then on from there to fencing, water systems, reinforced cattle walkway systems, and then just a rotational grazing plan. It was a tremendous resource that was part of EQIP. So they got us set up for how we want to do our fencing, our paddocks, things like that. And then the EQIP plans were kind of spread out over 5 years. And so we started it with our 3 transition years of organic, that we seeded everything into a really diverse mix of grasses and legumes, perennial pasture, but also like something that we're going to be able to mechanically harvest for hay when we didn't have enough cattle to keep up with the grazing. And so that was our plan. That was what we did, over the 3 years. Actually, in year 3, we ended up bringing dairy heifers onto the farm then, because they could start grazing then in year 3, to then get bred and calve into 2018 and start the whole milking process in 2018. So like everything meshed together, and like with a lot of planning. And like I said, we had a lot of help. But it's now we're into using the systems, for 3 years since we've been milking the cows, and we're seeing what works. And it's really fun to like see it all in action.
You're talking about a couple different programs. So you're talking about EQIP, and you're talking about working with NRCS. So is that something that there were grants available for, or did you have to outright pay them as consultants? And then the EQIP, is that a match that you get?
So EQIP is a grant.
Okay.
And so there's just certain different payment plans for different practices that you put into place. And so like we did a lot of the fencing ourselves, but I mean, it's set up to be a cost share program. So, and depending on how much work you're able to do yourselves versus what you need to hire out, each farm is going to take it in a little differently.
So another question I have for you is, you talked about getting a lot of help setting up your pastures, but was there somebody that helped you figure out what kind of cows were going to be the best cows for you for dairy? And what do you actually have on your farm?
Yeah, so well, I should also we connected, with Brad Hines at West Central Research and Outreach Center, and we modeled a lot of our systems on our farm after their system. It just made sense, like their pasture-based system. That's what we want to do. And so we wanted to have cows that are going to perform well on pasture and a grass-based system. We have all crossbred cows. And so actually, we established our herd from that University of Minnesota herd. We bought crossbred heifers and then and did buy some milking cows from there as well. They're 5-way cross. So, and it's working well for us.
Good. So related to your relationship with Organic Valley, have you been working with them for like 6 years now, or?
Well, I mean, in a little bit of a capacity, but we've been selling our milk to them now for 3 years.
And how is your relationship going for the size of operation that you have?
Good. I'm so happy working with Organic Valley and the co-op. It is a co-op. And the average size of their farm is, I believe, less than 100 cows. We're on the smaller end, and also we're trying to build our herd up as well. But yeah, we're right now, in that video, our milking herd is 35. We're up to 42 now. And I mean, we hope to be, I'd like to be around 50, milking 50 cows. And then that would ideally be like a one-person full-time farm income. That's the plan.
Well, it's good to have a plan. It's also good to be flexible, because we know that there's a lot of things that are out of our control.
Right.
But I think it's good that you know about what the right size is for your family operation and what you can manage, because I think that's really important. The work that we do at Cure, what we're most interested in, we're interested in a lot of things, but the thing that we're really looking at right now is the intersection between soil health and climate change. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe what you saw on the land related to water and soil when you started, and then talk about what you see now with the pasture-based operation.
Well, I feel a lot of times it's pretty easy to make direct comparisons because we are surrounded still by conventional row crop farms. And so, I mean, I can see really obvious things like erosion, especially from wind, during all seasons, the snort in the winter and dust blowing now this time of the year. It feels really good to have vegetative cover on the land all the time. And that's always our goal. And I can tell, that our pastures they take the water better, they retain the water better. We're able to, it's been, so now it's been 5-6 years that the pastures have been established, and, they're responding better to the significant rain events and, drier times too.
For sure. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term snort, out here in rural Minnesota in the winter, if farms don't have a cover crop down or something green down in the fall, and they just till and leave it tilled and the snow comes, the wind and the soil will melt the snow faster because it's dark and it'll pull the heat from the sun, and then the snow will melt, exposing the soil to the air and the wind, and then the wind will pick that up in the winter and just blow it around, and then you'll see that dirt um, moved across the landscape. Like in our situation, we are too also surrounded by conventional agriculture, and none of our neighbors are cover cropping currently. And my husband talks about how, why would they want to lose, an inch of topsoil every year into our yard? Because that's what seems like happens. Um, you were talking about how obvious it is for you to see and look about the differences around your farm. I'm curious to know if any of the area farmers are curious about what you're doing.
I hope so. I don't know. We're the odd ones out, and I hope, though. I don't know I wonder in conventional farming, like what the advice is for a beginning farmer or someone starting out, or even the younger generation. Like, is it still that you have to be big and you have to do it the way that it's always been done? I know that my neighbors who are older would tell me that they were like excited to see animals back on the land and things like that. And I just hope someone sees I hope that people see what we're doing, like maybe a younger farmer or something like that, and think like, oh man, if they're doing it that way, like maybe it's something we can think about.
You bring up a really good point. I mentioned this on an earlier webinar, but one of the things we notice on Sunday afternoons is all of our elderly neighbors are out for a little drive if the weather's nice. And it's like they slow down in front of our house because we have steers out on pasture. And I really think it's because they miss seeing that. I think that it is really a memory for them that they want to relive. But to your point about wondering, so this is one of the things that I think is really systemic about the Farm Bill, about financing, about crop insurance. That question about who is driving us to go big, who is making us think about always growing. Like if you're not getting bigger, I mean, I guess we asked you that question too, right? But in the sense of, the size of what you're working with. But I wonder, after visiting with a few folks the last few years talking about these issues, and we know how effective farm field days are. You talked about how it inspired you to want to connect with Organic Valley and do what you're doing and how you've learned. I'm wondering if we shouldn't be doing field days for crop insurance agents and bankers so that they can go to smaller and medium-sized family farms and see how they're doing it and see what their commitment is to the land and to the industry, and talk about why what they're doing is the appropriate scale. Because it seems like when I've talked to people who are trying to do this work, they say that their banker has even turned them down because they're not big enough, right? And so I think, and I'm just wondering, I've not really said it out loud before, but I'm just wondering if our field day model should like incorporate our ag industry people coming out. I mean, maybe they think they've seen it all and they know it all, but these field days are such a great way to be actually seeing it and experiencing it and talking to the people doing it, not hearing about somebody else's story from someone else. Because I think if you were actually on a farm and could actually see your animals like we saw in the video, and how curious they are and how they have personality and they're not just a number, and there's a real quality of life. And then even just seeing the comparative landscapes and runoff, one of the things that we know with grass or pasture-based, grazing-based operations is when we have those rain events that we've been having as part of climate change, right? So grass grazing pastures have the ability to go longer periods of time without water if they need to, because they've got a lot more organic material that can hold water, right? Or pull it from the lower levels because the root systems are more established. And then when we have these crazy like 2 to 4 inch events in like an hour, they can hold the water or absorb it more quickly and then hold it, which I think is really key to the durability of the landscape as well, and just being able to know that the grass is going to make it through the hotter, drier times. We have a few questions in the chat if you're open to that. We have a question that says they're curious about trying to understand the scale of your operation a little bit. How many acres do you have in operation?
Okay, so when we transitioned, when we established those pastures, we wanted to transition all of the tillable acreage that was available to us on Derek's grandma's farm. So that was about 115 acres. And then now just this year, so also when Derek's grandma was alive, as part of a little bit of, I think, like a safety, security, because she still was nervous about us doing this, she kept a lot of acres in CRP programs as an income for her. And that was her decision. She wanted to do that. And so now she passed, and fortunately, like, we're able to then get the CRP acres certified organic right away. We don't have to do a 3-year transition to put those into production. And so we'll pick up another 48 acres this year. But yeah, the pastures are 115 acres. And we do end up buying a lot of off-farm feed still. And so that's a challenge too, like as we decide the scale of our operation, like what makes sense. It's really hard to find like good quality and affordable certified organic feed, whether it be like hay or grains. Locally, we have to pay a lot of money to truck feed in and stuff like that. So we kind of decide we're really doing a balance of like how self-sufficient we can be on the farm producing our own feed, and to not have to source that off farm, to just kind of figure out what size makes sense for them.
That is true. But happily, I think there's more and more growers that are converting to organic in our area because we're finding it a little bit easier. I think our challenges were really about equipment, right? Because we're so small, we don't have big tractors. We don't have, so some of the people that grow organic are for the bigger dairies. They have the big bales, and we don't, we've had to buy them in the past, and, rely on our neighbors' kindness to come over with their tractor to move some stuff for us on occasion. And finding someone who does small bales for us, because we're way smaller than you are, but was really a challenge. But it takes time for them to trust that you're going to buy a certain amount every year. So if they produce it, they have a market for it too, and they're not sending it to a wholesale auction. I think that's important. So as we look at all you've shared with us today, I'm going to ask you that proverbial question about, like, if you were to start over, like right now, are there some things you wish you would have known before you jumped in with both feet?
I don't know. That's so hard because I'm a planner, but I would plan things to the end to never jump in. Because if I didn't know that things were going to go exactly right, I wouldn't want to do it. So that's where Derek and I are we balance each other out, because he's like, well, if we're not going to do it now, then when are we going to do it? And if not us, then who? And to that end, like, I'm so glad that like we did things when we did. When the kids were little, I was probably like, what were we thinking doing this when they were little? But, now they can help, and like they want to help, and they got to grow up seeing it. So like, I'm really glad about that. I don't know. It's hard. I said, I want so badly to see families stay on farms or small farms start and exist. And I don't have like the exact recipe for how to do that. And that's what's hard for me too, is because I want the outline, I want the plan. This is how you should start your farm. This is how you should do it. And it will work if you do it this way. And what I've had to accept is that doesn't exist. Like maybe there's a recipe, but it does not work on every farm and in every situation. That you have to be willing to adjust and flex and things like that. So just probably the biggest advice to anyone starting out, or if I had to do it over again, to just keep an open mind, like work on mindset, to not think that there's only one way to do things. Probably the biggest thing.
Sure. I probably didn't mention this earlier, but if you would like to ask Carrie a question, or if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and we have probably time for 2 or 3 more questions. I was going to say, regarding your answer, Carrie, to the last question, it seems like, you alluded to it a little bit before about having to convince family members that you wanted to do this, but were there other people that you had to convince to do this the way that you're doing it, the way you've chose to do it, besides you and Derek? Like, did you have to convince? Sometimes I even think, like, when we've invited people to come out to our operation, you think by inviting folks out, they're gonna like be encouraging you. But we've actually had people come out to our farm and go, wow, this is a lot of work. Why are you doing this? Yeah. And so, like, are there others that you have felt like you wanted to convince, or are there people that you felt like you didn't need to convince, but they weren't really helpful in your process either?
Well, we got a lot of, you want to be a dairy farmer? Like, oh, why would you want to do that? That's so much work. We definitely got a lot of that. And I took a lot, I took it to heart for a long time. A lot of unsolicited advice came in. And, but just to be able to like, let that roll off, I guess, we definitely get that. But as far as like convincing, well, this is a conversation that I have with Derek frequently. Like, anyone can be a farmer, right? Like you can start farming, but like whether or not you can continue to do that, whether you can support your family is you're going to be able to keep doing it or not. So I say the biggest person we had to convince probably is the bank. And that wasn't easy because we had to go in and like, we had to teach the banks about our systems because they're so used to a conventional system, and they're like, organic, huh? What? Like, what is that? Or why would you want to do that? Or you need to have you have to have this many more cows before we'd be willing to entertain that option. And so like, we were not able to source conventional lending. We ended up doing all of our lending now through the Farm Services Agency and beginning farmer loans. And we couldn't have done it without that. Absolutely.
Well, that's a good point, that there are other alternatives out there that support this type of agriculture. And without them, many people would be left in the wind. Judy's asking us if you could share with us how many times a day you milk and what milking system you use.
So we milk 2 times a day, and in a lot of ways, like our actual physical milking process, very similar to a lot of conventional dairies. So when we came out to the farm, there was no infrastructure, especially for dairy. And so we ended up building a milking parlor. That was another thing that we did a lot of research on and did a lot of farm visits and things like that. But so we milk in a swing 10 parlor 2 times a day.
So when you say swing 10, can you tell us how many animals that go into it at a time? And so
I would have known that like 5 years ago. The cows are outside. Our cows, they do not have any indoor housing. So they're either out on pasture in the summer, or they have a bedding pack in the winter. And so then they just come in for milking time. And so the cows all come in, we line them up on 2 sides, 10 cows each. They stand at an angle. And so we can prepare one side to milk them, have a milking unit on that side. And so when I say it's a swing milking unit, after we've milked that side, we've gotten the other side ready, then we swing the unit over and milk the cows on the other side. So 20 cows stand in there at the same time, and then 10 are milking at a time.
So with you being an organic operation, how often do you have to have your facility inspected or your milk inspected or tested?
So milk inspection, still that's the same as conventional, other than like we have to be grade A certified for milk, which most farms are now, but we have to be grade A. And so we just have a standard milk inspection every 6 months for state inspection. And then we have an interstate milk inspection every 2 years because our milk crosses state lines, because some of the processing is done in South Dakota and in Wisconsin. So we have an interstate milk inspection, but normal facility inspections. And then for organic certification, that's an annual renewal process. And so we update all of our paperwork annually and then have an on-farm inspection annually.
So what are the ideal breeds of animals for dairy milking? Like what you said, you have a mix of like 5. So
Yeah.
what are the different breeds of your?
Yeah. So we have, like I said, we have a crossbred herd. If you know anything or would like more information about stuff like that, the University of Minnesota, they have great stuff. But so they're Holsteins and Jerseys, like your very common breed. And then also Montbéliard and Normandy and a Viking Red.
Okay. So that is quite a variety then. I know a lot, or Organic Valley is really partial to Jerseys, I know, especially for butter. Like if they've got a herd that's all Jersey, they'll usually contract for butter, I know, but I wasn't quite sure with milk if they had a mix and what that mix preference was. So it's cool. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, so I'm just going to ask you one last time. Is there something that I didn't ask you that you want to share with folks before we sign off today?
Oh, I don't know. I talked a little bit about like mindset and how like important that has been, I think, to us continuing on our farm journey. The first thing being, that we had to get in our heads that like we actually could be farmers, maybe just because it wasn't common to do, or like, and then also like I need to get in my head that like it's not just men that are farmers either. I think for a really long time I thought that I was going to be the farmer's wife, and I was fine with that, like because I didn't know that I wanted to be a farmer, whatever. But I am the person on the farm here managing our day-to-day operations, and I work with a lot of men, and like something I think that women and girls should think about, that like they can take leadership roles on farms too, and there's opportunities for them to do that.
That is one of the best points for us to end on today. But before we end, I just want to take a minute to lift up our partners in this work. So like I had mentioned at the beginning, this was a partnership with a variety of different folks. So I want to thank Troy Goodnow from the Office of Sustainability at the University of Minnesota, Morris campus. Judy Johnston was part of our team at Stevens County Soil and Water Conservation District, Brian DeVore and Robin Moore from Land Stewardship Project. And then we received some funding from the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships through University of Minnesota Extensions. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I want to remind you that our last installment of this series is going to be on Tuesday, June 1st. And the last series is going to feature Ella Robertson and Eric Wana from the Sissetonawate over in Peever, South Dakota. And I think you're not going to want to miss this episode either, because this is going to be quite a bit different than the other 5 installments. It's going to integrate not only different ways of looking at the land and different ways of making a living on the land or feeding your family and providing for your family on the land, as well as weaving in Dakota culture and the importance of the Dakota history in our river valley. Since most of us reside in the ceded territories of the Dakota people. So I encourage you to join us at noon on June 1st. Again, I want to thank you, Carrie, for joining us. And remember that all of these webinars can be seen at a later date. Once they're edited, we put them up and make them available to you to use and share with those you know that might be interested. They are archived on the CURE YouTube channel. You can also find them on the CURE website, www.cureriver.org. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.